Good day to all of you. So, in the last lesson, the psychosocial risk in the workplace and its reduction. So, we've already introduced you about stress, what happens to our body when we are under stress. So, for this lesson, the physiology of stress, we're going to study where the word stress came from, where is that concept came from. So, let's start our lesson. Okay, so our lesson again is the physiology of stress. So for the introduction, the definition of stress is the arousal of an organism as a result of a stimulus from the material or social environment that is assessed as threatening to its physical or psychological balance to an extent that exceeds its ability to cope with the problem. Due to the broad scope of the effect of stress mechanisms at various levels, from the molecular to the social levels, it is one of the most common natural phenomena shaping mutual relations between the environment and all living organisms, including humans, animals, and, as discovered in recent years, plants and unicellular organisms. Receptors receive about 10 raised to 9 bits of information per second from the environment, so the receptors of our body. Approximately 10 raised to 7 bits of information per second is transmitted back to the environment, mainly by speech, gestures, and mimicry. Only part of the environmental information, about 10 raised to 1 bits per second, is transmitted to the consciousness. These pieces of information mostly aim to ensure the safety of the organism. Communication with the environment is possible due to the basic properties of receptors such as excitability. It allows the nerve and muscle cells to receive energy from the environment and transform of this energy into specific functions of organs and systems, for example, in the muscular layer of the internal organs or in the locomotor system. Next is we have reception specificity. Enables the nerve cells, with their diversified structure, to selectively receive information contained in various forms of environmental energy, mechanical, acoustic, and chemical. Pain receptors are an exception, as they respond to all types of stimuli if its intensity results in damage to the skin and/or internal organs. And then we have, last but not the least, is the sensory adaptation. The transmission of information to the subconsciousness regarding stimuli that have been assessed as non-threatening to the organism. Information from pain receptors is an exception here. It remains in the consciousness for as long as the damaging factor is exerting influence. So the brain is the main receptor for information. It manages all the systems and internal organs of the body. The nervous, endocrine, circulatory, and respiratory systems carry out the orders of the brain to ensure that all organs function while simultaneously maintaining balance of the internal processes of the organism. All of these systems cooperate with the locomotor or musculoskeletal system to carry out the orders of the brain in terms of exerting active influence upon the environment, for example, during the work processes. So we have this table, interactions between the environment in a human body. So there happens to have an environmental event. Then next is perception of the event by the receptors of the sense organs of the human body. And then assessment by the central nervous system. Next is interpretation of the brain. Next is modulation by personality and genes. And next is transmission of information by the neurohormonal system to the effector organs such as heart, lungs, kidneys, muscles, and so on. Next is transformation of the signals sent to the effector organ into specific organ function. And last but not the least is a complex physiological and behavioral response of the organism or the human body coordinated by the brain. So next is we have theories of stress development. In the mid-19th century, physician and physiologist Claude Bernard, in his work entitled Lessons on the Phenomena of Life Common to Animals and Vegetables, presented a theory summarizing the basic rules of cooperation between the organism's internal environment and the external environment, as well as the unity of life processes for all living organisms. And in the 1920s, Bernard's concepts were further developed by the physiologist Walter B. Cannon, who was the first to use the word homeostasis to describe the dynamical stability of the internal environment, which is maintained despite changing conditions in the external environment. So we have this fight or flight reactions. As you have already watched the video, it is used, for example, if a person detects there is a danger in the environment, if he or she can face the danger, so he or she is going to fight. But if it's life threatening, so the reaction is flight. So we have the fight or flight reaction depends on the release of the hormones. For example, for the left side, we have the release of adrenaline from the adrenal medulla. So adrenaline has an effect mainly on the beta receptors of effector cells and the response of the organism. So heart muscle contraction, which becomes stronger and faster, dilation of blood vessels in the heart and in the skeletal muscles, dilation of the alveoli, increased activity of the alimentary tract, decrease of the concentration of glycogen and fats. While for the release of the noradrenaline, so it comes from the sympathetic neurons and the adrenal medulla. So noradrenaline has an effect mainly on the alpha receptors of the effector cells. So the responses of the organism, which we have contraction of vessels of the skin, intestines, and kidneys, contraction of the spleen, bristling up for animals, less intense activity of the alimentary tract, and then decrease of the concentration of glycogen. So the role of adrenaline in the mobilization of an organism under the influence of strong emotion had already been described by Napoleon Cybulski, a Polish physician and scientist in the late 19th century. Discoveries that laid the foundation for knowledge of the basic mechanisms of adaptation to environmental conditions were popularized in the late 20th century due to the efforts of a great scientist and physician, Hans Selye, as you can see in the previous lesson. So we have the stimulus in the environment, and then we have the pattern of coping with stress experience and genetic factors. So the description of this figure is these are the potential responses of the organism to stress. So active coping with stress, that is the fight or flight reaction, which is on the left side, and the passive reaction due to loss of the ability to cope with stress leading to depression. We have the right side. So for the fight or flight, so we have the amygdala, then we have the effect is behavioral agitation, and then what are the defensive reactions since this is fight or flight, active control of territory, aggression, and then there is activation of the sympathetic adrenal system. So the control is for these are the hormones, the noradrenaline, corticosterone, gonadotropins, and testosterone and oxytocin. For aiming at control, so these are the hormones, the adrenaline, prolactin, B endorphins, renin, fatty acids, and glycogenolysis. So this is for the fight or flight. This is the advantage of advantage reactions for stress because we're going to fight or flight. But as it is said in the previous lesson, our body should not be always in this mode because it will going to transform our brain and our organs, and it will eventually will make damage to our organs. So this is another reaction. This is the loss of control, and then because of loss of control, there is depression. So um, the activated in the fight or flight is the amygdala, while here is the hypothalamus. So there is a behavioral inhibition. Then we have conservation withdrawal reaction, so limitation of movement, subordination, low level of sexual needs. And then hypothalamic adrenal system is activated. So for the loss of control, these are the hormones that is secreted. The ACTH, corticosterone, catecholamines, testosterone, gonadotropins, and pepsin. So again, the body, as you've learned in your previous lesson, the body should not always be stressed because it has harmful effects on our body, especially these hormones that are secreted and will be going and flowing in our bloodstream. Okay, interesting studies by endocrinologist W. Mason proved that the stress reaction is neutralized and the adrenaline and corticosteroid concentrations in the blood do not change. In situations wherein emotions associated with a sense of threat due to pain or hunger have been blocked pharmacologically. So another figure, so reaction of the organism to stress. So the role of conscious perception as a condition for the emergence of stress reactions. So again, there's an event and then sensory perception of our body and the sensory tracts. It can either be cognitive interpretation by the neocortex, and then we have spotting of threat, stress reactions through the hypothalamus, and direct innervation by the sympathetic and parasympathetic system. It's either the fight or flight reaction or the general adaptation syndrome rather. And then the effector organs. While for this one, the right side, we have effective integration by the limbic system. So lack of recognition of threat and lack of stress reaction. So the development of the stress concept, we have three. So the stress is it affects the sympathetic nervous system. So according to W. Cannon, so strong activation of the sympathetic system, fight or flight reaction, and then adrenaline. For non-specific stressor, so it affects the pituitary gland. It is by, according to Hans Selye, so adrenaline responds to stress, adrenaline, and corticosteroids. And then another is we have stressor causing emotions, so the cortex and then the limbic system, hypothalamus, then it goes back to the limbic system and then to the cortex. And then according to J. Mason, multidirectional responses of the nervous system and the internal secretion of the system. So it is said that the stress is good for fight or flight reaction. The previous discussion, for example, there is fire. And then again, how did you as a person, you want to save your things, and then how come that you have carried the refrigerator out, which is very heavy. So that is an example of the fight or flight reaction. So this non-specific stressor and stressor causing emotions, this is what we call the stress that is more of because of emotions of what is happening. So this actually cause depression. Okay, next is we have physiological basis of adaptation to stress. So adaptation is the ability to adjust to both changing conditions and environmental stress, and is one of the basic processes that ensures the survival of all organisms. So individual and social adaptation mechanisms are interesting from the perspective of number one, ailments and health effects of this condition in everyday life and at work, and number two, social and economic consequences. So the three objectives need to be achieved in the processes of adaptation to environmental stimuli. So first is maintenance of homeostasis, or the physiological and psychological homeostasis or balance, protection of metabolic resources and psychophysiological efficiency, and effective protection against stress or steps to counteract it. So, central adaptation mechanisms are neurophysic changes taking place as a result of stress in the central nervous system, or CNS, or the brain, and the associated changes of behavior encompassing the processes of learning to cope with stress and maintaining an active attitude throughout the process. So, the stages of the learning process are number one, threat recognition by sensory receptors and organs. Next is estimation of the seriousness of the threat and prediction of the effects of its influence, and determination of the possibilities of coping with it. So actually, we can adapt to stress. Okay, it's not just, for example, there's stress, then you're going to flight, escape. So if that's your easy way out, but of course, as already discussed, stress is inevitable and stress is everywhere. It's just you can remove, change, accept, accept or adapt to it. And then next is the active attitude of coping with stress is the processes of selection of the tactics of struggle and avoidance behaviors or prediction-based responses, including psychophysiological reactions preceding stress. So the processes of learning and active coping with stress are the same for all organisms, including those with a low level of CNS development. This means that the processes takes place in the extracortical structures of the brain and are part of the basic neural mechanisms which adapt organisms to interactions with the environment. So the significant mechanisms of central adaptation include changes in the nervous system that lead to a decreased sensitivity to pain. So peripheral adaptation mechanisms protect the organs such as the heart and the kidneys and the systems, the circulatory, respiratory, and endocrinal systems against the excessive activity of hormones released intensively during stress, such as adrenaline, noradrenaline, vasopressin, corticosteroids, and renin. As I've said, these hormones, if they stay too long in our body, it can wreak havoc, because that's why as much as possible we should not be always subject to stress, because it may damage exactly, not may, it will really damage our body for if it stayed long periods in our bloodstream. Okay, we have this chart. So adrenaline concentration in the blood during exposure to substantial stress, a 30-minute stress event. So we have this one, 1S, and a stress event repeated for 7 days. So that's why 7S, 14 days, and 27 days. Okay, what you can see here, so we have a stressor for 30 minutes. If it is one day, it's your first time of exposure to the stress, you can see there is a high level of adrenaline concentration because your body is not yet adapted to it. So that's why the adrenaline is high. But as you can see with 7 days, 14 and 27, because it is said here that the 30-minute stressor is repeatedly the person who is under the stress is repeatedly that experiment is repeated for 7 days, for 14 and 27. He or she is repeatedly exposed to the stress. So you can see, because the person is repeatedly exposed to the stress, what happens to the adrenaline? It becomes lower because the body or the person is repeatedly exposed to the stress. The adrenaline is lowered because the body is already used with the stress. So the adrenaline levels becomes low. This chart only concludes that really our body is adapting to stress and how to cope with it and how to survive the stress. So we have another chart. So adrenaline concentration in the blood during a 30-minute exposure to novel stress, so 1NS, and a response to the same event after previous long-term exposure to another stress situation. So this is another experiment in which the person is already under stress. So is repeatedly exposed to that stress. So it means it has a lower secretion of adrenaline because the body is already used with the stress. But what happens here is that there is another stress which is called the novel stress, a new stress factor that is also a 30 also the duration is 30 minutes. But as you can see, because the subject is exposed to another stress, you can see the adrenaline levels is higher, which is 3,000 here, but here is only 1,100. So the adrenaline concentration is higher if the subject is already exposed to the long-term exposed to the stress, and then you introduced another new stress. So the adrenaline is higher. Okay, health effects of stress. So stress causes mobilization of the entire organism. As the example, how did you carry the heavy refrigerator you alone while there is fire? Because of course, in those emergency situations, it's because of our adrenaline. So it really causes mobilization, movement. So when the mechanisms and effects of stress were being discovered in the 1980s, stress was estimated to lead to more than 14,000 sci- uh, physicochemical changes in an organism. So therefore, stress is a risk factor for many diseases of very diverse origins. So as I've said, it's not good that we are always under or subject to stress, because the hormones that is secreted while we are stressed can be it's not can, is harmful to our body if it stayed for a long time in our bloodstream, in our system. So, epidemiological studies have found a distinct correlation between the stress-inducing factors of life and work and the incidence of the following conditions, such as, these are the effects of stress: metabolic disorders, we have vascular atherosclerosis, obesity and diabetes; invasive diseases caused by both bacteria and viruses, tuberculosis and neoplastic diseases; regulatory diseases such as hypertension and coronary heart disease; and psychological disorders such as depression, anxiety, insomnia, and chronic fatigue syndrome. So, as early as now, you should really think of yourself. So, me as your instructor, of course, we are already the working group. So, my personal take on this, you have to make a choice. For example, such as this one. What if you're already feeling depressed and anxious and you're having, and then of course your body is very different now, you have a choice to choose yourself. So why is that? The first question is, how are you going to love someone? It's not love as the romantic love, but how are you going to give love to other people if you yourself, you don't love yourself first? It's not a sin to love yourself. It's not selfish. Because how can you give your full love to other people if you yourself, you're already deteriorating, not just physically, but also mentally. So you have a choice. So to take care of yourself. So no one's going to blame you if you choose yourself from time to time, especially if you're already, for example, you're already feeling depressed. And the thing is, in the end of the day, you're very lucky if there are other people who is willing to help you. But what if there's situations that you are alone and you're the only one who can help yourself? So again, with regards to this, stress actually affects not just the physical but also the mental health. So you always have to assess yourself from time to time. Is this still healthy for me? You really have a choice to make your life better and to have this work-life balance skills. So one day, since you're still students, but one day you're going to understand me what's the meaning of the work-life balance. So as I'm saying from the last lesson is that we here as your course facilitators, we're here to guide you as much as possible. But of course, please give us also time to replenish ourselves by doing, of course, the things that we love, because we're not just only teachers, but we have other roles that we have to fulfill. And as I've said, in the previous lesson also, it is said that the uh, workers in the service sector uh, tends to have burnout and more stress than other fields of work. So it includes teachers. So again, I'm saying this is for you have to love yourself also. Do not neglect the need for yourself, whatever it is, if it's recreational or you're happy just to be alone, just watching TV, if that's your way of your recreation and coping up and healing yourself, then it's good. Okay, under substantial stress, so let's continue. Adrenaline and other catecholamines exert a significant influence on the reactivity of the circulatory system by increasing the heart rate and the arterial blood pressure. Hyperactivity and a substantial level of variability in circulatory reactions under chronic stress, particularly in the case of genetic predisposition to hypertension, may become a direct cause for the development of resistant hypertension, which is caused by hypertrophy of the blood vessel muscle tissue. And then during long-term stress, as I've said, this is bad. Long-term stress, corticosteroids influence the concentration of insulin and balance of carbohydrates and lipids, leading to changes that cause metabolic diseases such as obesity. Since, for example, you have too many things to do or work, then you're already forgetting exercise. And of course, since you're in the office, almost every day, you're only sitting in front of your desk. So that's why, if you're, and of course, the workload is too high or too impossible to finish in one day. So, of course, you're going to develop obesity, diabetes, because these corticosteroids influence the concentration of insulin, and atherosclerosis. Then corticosteroids and catecholamines, mainly adrenaline, activate many metabolic paths through glycogenolysis, causing an increase in the production of coenzyme A molecules or CoA1 carbon fragments, which serve as building blocks for the synthesis of endogenous cholesterol. So that's why it also entails hypertension. And then in the sphere of psychogenic reactions, the role of corticosteroids in the development of chronic fatigue syndrome, conservation withdrawal reactions, depression, insomnia, and neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's or Parkinson's disease have been confirmed. So it is already existing. It really is confirmed that stress has these effects to our health. So studies have also confirmed a correlation between the increased secretion of corticosteroids and invasive diseases. So in meaning, if you're under stress, your immunity is low, so you can easily get sick. And then since the 1980s, so studies on the physiological and biomedical stress mechanisms have focused on processes caused by stress at the cellular level, initiated by the discovery of thermal shock proteins, or the SHP family, identified by Alfred Tessiers after accidental exposure of cells to a high temperature. Then the production of thermal shock proteins is a cellular level reaction to stress, a common in all organisms, plants, and animals. Actually, this is true because if someone will tell you that, oh, we are also stressed, but we can cope with it because you are younger. You should deal more stress. You should deal the stress better than ours because we are older. So, actually, when I ask an expert in relation to psychology, he or she told me that stress is actually happening in all of us, even the fetus, which is of course younger than us, which is not yet born. It can feel stress. Why is not people like us will feel stress? So do not doubt, for example, that if you feel stressed, that stress happens in all walks of life, whether you are young, whether you are old. So I hope that for I hope that, for example, if you're going to have your jobs one day, you're very lucky if you have these people who understands um, your coping of stress, because stress coping mechanisms is different with different people because of course of different personalities. So I hope that do not judge, for example, if this is the way he or she the way he or she copes with stress, and then do not compare it with yourself. Why is his stress coping mechanisms is not good? Of course, we have different personalities, so we have different ways of how to cope with stress. So I hope that your friends, your family, or whatever, respect the way how you cope with stress. I hope that no one will question you that that this is the way of how I cope stress. And then, for instance, 25 years of socio-epidemiological research conducted within the framework of the Whitehall or Work Health 2 programs or projects in the European Union proved that the long-term effects of stress cause disorders of the circulatory and immune system. So we have that. So again, for example, in your workplace, if ever you're in the future, in the near future, you have to assess. I hope that the companies that you'll be employed with, they have this, especially because actually it's more stressful to work now than it's the old normal, because of course we still have the interaction, we still have the social support. But since, as you can say, mom, how is it it's more stressful, you're already at home? No, it's because there are limited interactions that you can do Of course, I cannot speak, for example, to my husband regards to problems at work. He or she can understand little, but the context of or the situation, he cannot relate to that because he's not included in the company. So, um, so in the previous lesson, social support is very important. So we have to. I hope that the companies now will have programs regarding how to cope up with stress, and then there are also like hotlines that anyone can seek help whenever they need it, because of they need some at least they need someone to talk to about their problem, because that's actually the stigma of mental health. Sometimes people are going to say, oh, that's just how you feel. It's just that's not valid. It's just how you feel. No, but now, as I've learned that, of course we have different personalities, so what you feel is valid. So it's okay to seek help, to ask help. It's not because you ask help because you're already abnormal. No, it's normal. It's actually normal because stress is really there. It's really happening. So why are you going to hide when you do have someone to talk to, or of course if you really need a medical expert to ask, or a medical practitioner for example, to relieve your stress. Okay, all aspects of research on stress, including biomedical, psychological, and psychosocial, have been combined into a single field of research that deals with the biology of happiness and positive well-being. So actually, there are courses such as I've encountered in Coursera. They have this course, positive psychology. So it deals with, for example, being positive in everything that will happen in your life. That you have to think, it's like you're going to think out of the box. For example, if something bad happens, think of it as a blessing of this guys, and then think of it as another opportunity. It's hard to think like that, but it's obtainable. So what of course, with the power of our mind, just be positive always, that for every failures that we encountered or stress that we encountered, always think of the positive advantage of why is it happening to us. And then next is, during a conference on stress in Budapest in 2007, Andrew Streptow presented the results of a meta-analysis indicating that the death rate in a population of several thousand people dominated by positive emotion and pro-health behaviors was lower than the average by almost 19%. So, again, actually, this is also a very good lesson for me because, as I've said, I'm a person who always thinks in advance in a negative way to make myself ready if that will really happen. So, as a conclusion, I think it's bad for the health because you're already thinking of something bad will happen, but it's not yet really happening. So now let's practice to have positive emotions, that whatever comes in our way, may it be problems or tribulations, that it has a positive effect on us. It will open new opportunities. So let's practice that mindset. Okay, so we have summary. So stress is an interaction between the environment and an organism that is interpreted by the organism as threatening its physical or psychical stability, causing negative emotional arousal, leading to an excessive physiological response including neurohormonal changes. Emotions that accompany a sense of threat are associated with neurophysiological reactions originating in the hypothalamus of the brain and causing a multitude of psychophysiological changes. Stress has negative consequences for somatic and emotional health and leads to negative social phenomena. So, adaptation to stress, which is aimed at maintaining homeostasis in the internal environment of the organism, is one of the basic mechanisms of survival under changing environmental conditions. Next is we have psychophysiological mechanisms adapt by reducing reactivity to subsequent stress events and establishing a condition that is a compromise between agitation and suppression of the systems responding to stress. So adaptation is based on learning processes, including recognition and assessment of the quality of the stimuli, assessment of the modes of coping with stress, prediction of the consequences, and determination of the possibilities of overcoming stress. Positive effects of adaptation are the stabilization of the physiological and emotional processes and the strengthening of the immune system. The organism's ability to adapt diminishes as a result of long-term stress with which it is unable to cope. This may lead to negative health consequences expressed as somatic and psychological disorder. As you can see in our previous slides, which has a chart that if you are exposed to that stress, of course, that's just an experiment to see that there is a lower concentration of adrenaline. But as I've said, if it's a long-term stress, it's not very healthy for our body. And then prevention of stress effects should be based on activities aimed at increasing adaptation abilities at both the physiological and the psychological levels. Okay, so again, with regards to stress, stress is inevitable. We cannot avoid it. It will always happen in our life. So the only way to do that is, of course, it's either you remove, you remove the stress, or you change your tactics and then accept the stress. But then, of course, with social support, with your interpersonal relations, you can still cope with the stress. And then, of course, if you have, I hope, again, I've already mentioned this in the previous lesson, if you have a strong connection with God above, that's also a plus by means of prayers. So I hope that stress will not control you, but you must control the stress. And of course, you must control. Don't be reactive with any stress factors. You must be proactive. Think first before you react. Of course, because being reactive is also very stressful. So as you can see, what are the bad effects of stress in our health? So we have depression, cardiovascular diseases. So I hope that by this lesson, I can help you to at least be mindful of ourselves, be mindful of our health, be always positive amidst what is happening to our environment, to our family, or to our life. So again, I hope that you have someone to talk as a social support so that we can combat stress. So another addition with this lesson. So I hope that there are many videos with regards to stress and all about our lesson. So I hope that your internet connection is not just used for playing games again, as I am always reiterating that. I hope that you also use that for educational purpose. For example, the videos that I've included are I got it from TED Ed, which is TED Education. Which if you're going to watch that, it's not very long. You can have um, general information. Oh, so that's what it happens when stress when we are stressed. So they have many topics, and also we have the psych2go.net. So this is all about psychology, about your personality. So I've got the videos, of course, from the previous lessons, the how you know that you are burned out and what are the solutions that you can do to rejuvenate yourselves. So if you have any questions, so feel free to comment below, and please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. So thank you very much and good day.